Hello, and thanks for joining us again this afternoon for another in our series of artist talks with Roberts Camera. Joining me today is John Scott, who's on camera with me, and our guest today, Jeff Wolin. Due to some technical difficulties, will only be joining us via audio. So, Jeff, are you with us?
I am, Steve.
Well, thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure to be able to do this again with my friends at Roberts, and glad to be able to share some of your work, Jeff. I'm going to bring up our presentation here, and I think you should see the welcome screen now. So today is July 28th. I can't believe the summer's flying, but again, joining us today is Jeff Wolin from Jeff is in Chicago now, but I think you did a lot of your time in Indiana.
I did. I was at Indiana University.
So a bit of today's agenda. So we'll be starting with a little bit of an overview from John on Roberts Camera, then a little bit about Jeff. We'll talk a little bit about what Jeff's gear bag contains, and then we'll get to what's really important is the imagery that Jeff has created. And then at the end, we'll have some time for open discussion and questions. If you have a question, feel free to type it in while the webinar is going on. We'll try to answer them and answer as many as we can during the webinar. If we can't get them answered during the webinar, we will try to follow up and get you an answer post-webinar. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Scott to do a little bit of history on Roberts and give us an update on what's going on with our friends in Indianapolis.
Hello, as Steve said, thanks for joining us today. We're certainly pleased to do another artist series, and with Mr. Jeff Wolin. You can see on screen there, Roberts is a third generation family business. We started with Robert and Roz Pullman in 1957, and kind of moved from the general service merchandise catalog showroom kind of thing into photography pretty quickly. We found our niche and certainly have been enjoying the experience for the last 40 or 60 plus years, pardon me. Third generation, moving from Bruce Pullman to his eldest daughter Meredith and son-in-law Corey, and certainly looking forward to continuing to be great customer service and helping all those in need. We've been proud to be a Hasselblad authorized dealer for quite a few years, and working hand in hand with Steve, really helping to take care of all the Hasselblad users out there. So if you have any questions for us or need to reach us in any way, obviously you can see our contact information there on screen. And we're pleased to join with everyone this afternoon. I'd like to introduce Jeff Wolin. Jeff is a professor emeritus from Indiana University. And Jeff, we'd like to hear a little bit about you and your past. You know, what led you into photography, started you on your path, and how did you find teaching?
Well, so this is interesting. I began photography almost exactly 50 years ago to the day. I always, I was fascinated by photography. A lot of my friends had cameras. There were no courses at my school at Kenyon on photography. I was an English major at a time, but I saved up with a summer job, and some friends of mine and I drove from New York to California, photographing all the way. At that point, I'd never heard of Robert Frank, but so it was 50 years ago, and when I got back from the summer travels, I learned how to develop film, how to make prints. And then things just fell into place, and I've never looked back. My first job in photography, first full-time job, was as a police photographer in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I had learned how to print color when I was in school briefly in Antwerp, Belgium, the art school, and that particular technical skill helped me get this job because police departments were moving from black and white to color. And so then, after a couple of years of that, I got tired of doing mugshots and crime scenes and was ready to continue my education. I went to RIT in Rochester, New York, sort of the biggest photo school on the planet. And then from there got a job at the George Eastman House in Rochester, the world's largest collection of photographic art and technology. After doing that for 5 years, and I was teaching part-time at the University of Rochester. I got a full-time job, tenure track at Indiana University, and stayed there for 35 years.
Jeff, certainly an interesting path to end up where you are, and now you're in Chicago, correct? You're living here.
Yeah, once I retired from Indiana University, I moved up to Chicago, where my gallery is, where the museums that I've worked with are. There's so many former students up here and lots of friends, so I was ready to get back into a more urban environment.
Very cool, very cool. And looking here, you're represented and affiliated with the Edelman Gallery here in Chicago, yes?
Yeah, Catherine Edelman Gallery. I was one of the first artists who signed with her a little over 30 years ago, and she's done extremely well. She became the president of the APAD, the Association of Independent Photographic Art Dealers, and we've had a very, very wonderful, supportive relationship for over 30 years.
Very cool, very cool. So you are the artist behind the imagery, and this is a list of some of the gear that you use to create your artistry. You've been using the X1D, I think, for what, 3 years or so now, I think?
A little over 2 years.
Okay, all right. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about why you moved into the X1D and what you found the benefits to be. And it looks like you've got two favorite focal length lenses, the 30 and the 45. But how did you come about the X1D?
So I've been working, like everyone else in photography for all those years, I worked with film and mostly large format cameras. I had an 8x10, a Deerdorf made here in Chicago that I used for about a decade. And then when photography became digital, about 15 years ago, I switched over to digital and eventually wound up with a Mamiya 645 with a leaf back, which was fine, but it was large and bulky. And about 2 or 3 years ago, basically Leaf said they're no longer going to maintain the back. They're not going to update the software anymore, and I was on my own with a camera that would no longer function. So it was either get a new leaf back, but I didn't like the bulkiness of the equipment. And by then the Hasselblad X1D had come out, and I really liked well, first of all, that it was medium format. The mirrorless design made it light, comfortable, or compact and portable and comfortable. And now that I'm photographing all over the place, I need a camera that I can easily carry everywhere, and also that wouldn't be too hard on my wrists. And also, I wanted something that had really good lenses and was high res. And finally, and most importantly, when I researched medium format digital, the sync speed. It's got a lens. These are lens and shutter lenses, like I was used to with large format. And so I could synchronize. I use flash for almost everything, and I could sync my flash with daylight and have a lot more flexibility and creativity with the ability to sync at really, really high speeds.
Awesome, very cool. We're glad that we were able to produce a camera to help you to create and continue creating visionary images. So enough about the gear. Let's take a look at some of the work that you've done, Jeff. We're going to take a look at a series that Jeff's been working on. It's called Faces of Homelessness. And before we get into that, just a quick question. Given the subjects that you're working with in this series, how do you ensure that the subject matter, that they don't feel objectified or put in an uncomfortable situation when you're photographing them?
Well, that's a great question. And basically, I would just say that for most of my career, I've worked with people who have experienced difficult or traumatic experiences. I'm interested in the way that memory operates, and especially memory of trauma, how we construct memory, and how we deal with the most difficult experiences. So I'm known for my portrait series of Holocaust survivors, the exhibition that opened at the International Center of Photography in New York some time ago. And I worked with 43, I think, Holocaust survivors. And I had worked out a way of interviewing people on videotape, and then taking different excerpts from their stories and combining it with their portraits. At that point, I was using a more handwritten kind of approach to the narrative.
Very cool.
I went from there to Vietnam War veterans, and that took me finally, not just Americans, but the other side, the people who were shooting at our men and women, and then the Pigeon Hill series, which we may get to at the end if we have time, that were photographs of people living in a housing project in Bloomington that I took between 1987 and 1991, and then picked up again in 2010 and finished about 5 years ago. So I've been working with people who had difficult lives, and learned how to deal with people and show them that I respected them and involved them in all aspects of the process. I show them the texts that I've excerpted. I show them the portraits I want to use. And I just, when I was at the Eastman House years ago, I was printing Lewis Hines negatives. And, he's this fabulous photographer who photographed people coming into immigrants at Ellis Island, and then finally people who were dealing with, child labor, kids that were working. And so he was an inspiration for me. And then later I studied with Walter Rosenblum and Andre Kertész, and learned how to be a photographer, a more humanistic kind of approach to portraiture. My technique of using text is what maybe moves it all forward. That's really, I also don't just go up to people on the street who are homeless. I decided that I needed to work with organizations, professional organizations that deal with homelessness. And that's, they introduced me to people, so they're vetted. And I know that these people have been are reliable and have stories to tell that are important. So it's not hard for me to be respectful for these people. They certainly deserve our respect.
Certainly do. So what can you tell us about this first image of Maxica and her kids?
So when I decided to, first of all, I'd say that one of the photographs I did at the Pigeon Hill then and now, one of the individuals had become homeless, and I photographed him basically as a homeless individual man. And that, so I'd been thinking about that issue. And of course, everyone thinks about that issue, because as you travel around anywhere in this country, you see homeless people. So when I moved to Chicago, it was eye-opening to see so many people on the street. And although I wanted to photograph them, I just instinctively knew that it was not a good idea to just go up to people and say, "Hey, you're homeless, let me take a picture." There's a lot of things like that, people sleeping on heating grates and in boxes. That's not the kind of photographer that I am. So I went to the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, one of the most important and respected organizations in the country, and certainly in Chicago, for that deals with advocacy for homeless issues. And they have a group that are called leaders. They're people who were formerly homeless, who are now living in shelters or single room occupancy, SROs, or have their own place finally. And this woman, Maxica, was one of the leaders, one of these people that go out to the shelters and to find people who are homeless and who need help, and she directs them towards that aid. She also does, the leaders do advocacy in Springfield, the capital of Illinois, for homeless issues. And so I met Maxica through the CCH, and she invited me to her apartment. She was homeless. How did she become homeless? She had cancer, and she had breast cancer. It was far more advanced than the early diagnoses, and had to pay for everything. She was saving up to buy her own house for her and her kids. She's a single mom. She was completing her undergraduate degree, really outstanding woman, smart. But the hospitalization, it drained all, she didn't have good insurance, and it drained her bank account. And so she wound up not on the street, but in shelters. And then finally, she was given an apartment. So she has an apartment of her own, this is the hallway outside that apartment. She wanted the kids to look extra special for the photograph. So I love the way they're dressed and the way they're posing for the camera.
Definitely. And then our next image is Robert, and Robert has a story. All of these individuals, just like all of us, have a story. And I love how you represent some of their story right in the imagery that you create with the text.
Oh, thanks. It looks like it's written on their wall. You know.
Yeah.
Robert was a drug dealer and was muscle for a drug lord. They had a disagreement. The drug lord thought Robert was stealing his drugs and put a bullet in his head. He went in the hospital, didn't die. He could have. And from that point on, decided to clean up his life. It was an epiphany. And he was homeless for a while. He rode the trains or would go to the hospital to get put into a nursing home for a while. But now he's got his own place. He lives in Chicago public housing and is happy, and he's been clean for 10 years. And he's also one of the leaders for CCH.
Very cool. And now we have Betty.
Yeah, Betty, another leader from CCH, and she, her story is she's also a single mom. Her story deals with she was renting a place in Pilsen, and the person who owned the place that she was renting was foreclosed on. He wasn't paying his mortgage, and so she and her family were basically sent out on the streets, had nowhere to go. And this is almost like Les Miserables. She was caught stealing some clothing at a clothing store. She was stealing a couple of tops for her girls, and wound up doing, I think, a week in a jail for that crime. And the judge understood. He gave her a lenient sentence because he understood that she was escaping a domestic violence relationship, and that's something that drives a lot of homelessness is domestic violence. But she's got her own place now.
Thomas, this image of Thomas is what I think more people would equate with, homelessness as opposed to the apartment or things like that. What's Thomas's story? Where's he living?
So at this point in time, and these are snapshots, not literally. I mean, they're points in time, snapshots in time. They're more formal portraits, of course, but they're a moment in time. And before that, I took the picture, they had a life, and after I took the picture, they had lives. And so Tom actually likes living outdoors, and he was the mayor of Uptown Tent City. So he lived in a small encampment, actually not so small, under Lakeshore Drive in Uptown part of Chicago. And the police are coming often to clear out their possessions. And he's become a very strong advocate for homeless issues in Chicago. And he cares for other homeless individuals, helps them get meals and cooks for them. His story was his parents died when he was a boy, and he and his siblings went to live with an uncle, but it wasn't a good fit for Tom. He was a little rebellious and became homeless as a young teenager. But he's got his thing together now and has just decided that he wants to be a strong homeless advocate. He wants to live outside, and he wants to, help others.
So we'll move on to the end then. But a quick question is, how do the subject of the photographs? I'm assuming that you share with them the final works and in the book or the public. How do they react to that? What is their reaction to being published or put up in a gallery? Have you had anyone that's not been positive? Is it mostly positive? How does your subject react to the final work?
I would say that this is similar to all the projects I've done. People, because it's a collaboration, because they're telling me their stories, and because the nature, the way I approach them, they know I'm not doing anything harmful. I also donate a percentage of sales when sales occur to organizations that these individuals support. Sometimes I give them gift cards, if they're particularly needy, and so that they can go get food and medicine. But for the most part, it's this collaboration, and they have in this series and in other series, people generally like what I do. If they don't, I will make the print over again. I will change the text. I'll do whatever it takes for them to be satisfied with the final result. I have to say, with the homeless, it's a little harder sometimes to find them.
Sure.
Again, some of them I have their phone number or email, and I can continue to stay in touch and let them know what's going on. Others, because of their nature of their lifestyle, I've lost touch with, and that's unfortunate.
Sure. Reading the text here, it looks like Andon was a political refugee.
So yeah, he grew up in Bulgaria, but he was Macedonian, a part of Bulgaria, and he was involved in the Macedonian Liberation Organization, and the communists in Bulgaria were hunting them down. They killed his uncle, and he heard they were looking for him, so he fled. He had family here in the U.S., and he's worked his whole life. But what happened was he's had some disability issues with COPD and other things related to the work that he did. So he was evicted from from the place he was renting, and I photographed him at a shelter that deals with homeless people who have medical issues that they're treating, and they can stay for, I think, up to a year at this place.
Very cool.
Both Andon and Gio were also in the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, and are involved in a subgroup of CCH called Bring Chicago Home, which is an attempt to persuade politicians in the city of Chicago and in the state to set aside more funds for homeless issues. So, the people have this idea that homeless are all the same. They're all drug addicts, they're all mentally ill. And what I'm trying to show here is there is some of that, but for the most, that's not the majority of individuals. There are people who are homeless who are, Gio here was an Army veteran, and he was hit by a car, and he had lost his job at this time, and he was convalescing also at this shelter that Andon was at. And so he was, at the point that I took this picture, he didn't know if he was going to have his hip replaced. In fact, he was able to just get by with physical therapy. And he talks about how, and you can see a picture of him in Army uniform behind him on that bulletin board. He's holding the Bible. The thing that helped him, because he was an alcoholic, was Alcoholics Anonymous and religion. So I used I copied the gold in Photoshop from the Holy Bible front title and used it for his, against his locker to tell his story. But he talks about how both religion and Alcoholics Anonymous have helped him get his life together. And now he's working again. I just talked to him last week, and he's got a full-time job. He's got his own place.
It's nice to see that some of these people can, or the majority of what we're looking at, come out of the homelessness, and they're able to make a better life after their struggles.
Well, it's hard, and sometimes it's episodic. And the key thing is, meaning you're homeless, you're not homeless, you're homeless, you're not homeless. And so the important thing is to find solutions to this. And one thing the studies show is that if somebody is homeless, if you can get them out of that condition into some kind of shelter or remedial situation, get them their own roof over their head, help them with job training and finishing their GED if that's what's necessary. It's like 6 months to a year. If you can keep them, having a situation where they're living on the streets for less than a year, they have a much better chance of getting through homelessness, of not being homeless in the future. But the longer people are on the streets, the harder it is for them to adapt to a sheltered environment. This young man was homeless he was a runaway, and joined a gang, was dealing drugs. When he had a child, he decided, I don't want to do this anymore. I have a kid, I have responsibilities. And so he decided to quit the gang. And when he told them he was quitting, they beat the crap out of him. But he left the gang, and he's working. This was done in Los Angeles, in Venice Beach. I decided to expand the project from Chicago to include Los Angeles because the West Coast has a different look and different causes and solutions to homelessness. And so I worked with a place out there called SPY, the Safe Place for Youth, which is this fabulous organization that makes no judgments on the kids that come in. Any kid can show up at their door, and they'll help them find shelter, food, help them with their schoolwork, work with their music career, whatever it is they're trying to do, it helps them. So this guy, Andy, was, I'll read the last part. Most people think homeless live on the streets and are dirty. It doesn't last forever unless you want it to. It's beauty and struggle. It's human. I want to become an advocate for the homeless.
Very cool. We've got a question from one of the attendees. It's from Carlos Diaz. He's asking, traditionally we associate the genre of photography with black and white photography. Why choose color, and how does it function for you towards your objectives or intent?
Well, Carlos, hi man, how you doing? This image sort of explains it. You can drain the color from it and see how it works, and it would be a very different thing. I understand the tradition of humanistic photography. Well, the history of photography is mostly black and white, but I've mostly worked in black and white. The Pigeon Hill series, if we get to it, you can see that even the contemporary images that I did with the leaf back with the Mamiya were done. I made them look, I matched them so that they were all black and white because I didn't want a jarring juxtaposition. I'm becoming, why not? You're digital, so everything is color, black and white, everything you want it to be. You have the choice. So when I first started the series, I started draining the color, and I realized, I'm trying to work with, I mean, this one is different, but for the most part, they're not saturated color. They're desaturated. I'm working with these skin tones. I don't know what to say. It's a great question, Carlos. And
tagging onto that.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead and finish. I was going to say, tagging onto that, we've got a question from John Kochi. He's saying, Jeffrey, your portraits, including the face of homelessness and dating back to your Pigeon Hill Then and Now series, often have a rather complex background as part of the composition, as does this photograph. You have an uncanny knack for making these backgrounds into context, which strengthens the story and portraits that they tell. I think this is hard to do. Do you have any comments on your process for visualizing how all this works in your photos?
That's a great question too. So I think of myself as an environmental portraitist. So instead of working in a studio environment, I work in these people's homes or in places that they are comfortable. Here we're outside of this is in Brighton Park. It's a mostly Latinx part of town. And Cecilia, another domestic violence survivor, but a very strong woman who's raising 2 kids and wants to show them how strong she can be and how strong women need to be. So we photographed, I photographed her outside this delicious taqueria, and I took them out to lunch there, and then we did the portrait, and I didn't know quite what I was going to have to work with. There was a whole wall of these murals. That the Hispanic part of town is famous and rich in these fabulous murals. So this one was a Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos mural. The woman on her shirt, and I didn't tell her, I never tell people how to dress, is Our Lady of Guadalupe. And just so you have these 3 layers of the clothing she's wearing, her expression, the painted woman in the mural, how they all interact. You see their lips, their mouths. So to me, there's nothing more exciting when it comes together. The layering, just there's so much more information in the photograph than just the story on a visual level, by by juxtaposing somebody in an interesting background.
Very cool. I understand that a great number of the homeless population have pets as a companion.
Right. And who wouldn't? I have a pet. Many people have pets, and they love them as much as we do. So, and especially them, it gives them, well, security, someone to love, and someone who loves them unconditionally. And so, yeah, it's not uncommon for homeless individuals to have pets. And what she talks about is she came from Tennessee, a small town, and she fled, I think, an abusive a toxic family situation. Came out to Los Angeles, eventually married, and she talks about why she likes to live out on the street and not in a shelter. In a shelter, you can't have a pet; they would take your pet away. She loves her dog. She and her husband would be separated. In most shelters, couples are separated. So people say, "Oh, why don't you go live in a shelter?" Well, there are reasons why you wouldn't want to, and so her life is harder. But she is, in Venice, California, the it's not like Chicago. There's no polar vortex, so she can, she's not going to freeze to death. But the police will typically come. This is outside Gold's Gym. Well, we can move on to the next one.
We can go.
It's okay. Okay, I'm mostly done. But she ends her story with, she's saying, let's see. If she's panhandling and she wants to get off the street, it's not fun to have people look at you like they do. One time I was just walking when a man called me garbage. It made me feel really depressed. And again, we tend to, the stereotype of homelessness, and we tend to dehumanize them. And these are people too, with loves and families and often jobs. This is one of my favorite people. He's been extraordinarily helpful. David Bush, he worked for most of his adult life, then joined his family business. The family business went bankrupt during one of the economic downturns, and he decided he had to live in his car temporarily, and he decided, you know what, I'm going to embrace this. And he embraced homelessness. His tent that he lives in is backed up to the Google headquarters, ironically. And he goes around and advocates for the homelessness, for homeless issues in the city of Los Angeles. He's very respected. If the New York Times or US News USA Today come to Los Angeles to do a story about homelessness, he's often the spokesman for the issues. And he has all kinds of wonderful ideas about how to solve homelessness. But like Tom Gordon, they remind me of each other. He he likes living this life. He helps feed people. He eats out of dumpsters and purposefully doesn't take any handouts. He doesn't want politicians to say, "Oh, you homeless, you're just a bunch of leeches." He's not. He doesn't take support from any government agency. And he makes these little signs. He doesn't sell them. He gives them away. This one says, "Be love." I have one that he gave me called "More Love." And I tell you, we were walking. Anytime I go out there in Los Angeles, I spend time with him, and we go out and have a meal. And we were walking once after lunch, and this guy was. And Venice is a very affluent community, and a guy is unloading an electric bike at an electric bike shop. He's obviously very wealthy, and he sees David, and he says, "Did you make that sign?" And David said, "Yes." And he said, "Can I give you a hug?" And "You gave one to my daughter. She was a teenager, and it changed her life." I saw this, and that's David. Awesome. He changes people's lives.
Awesome story. One of the another question we have from Regina is, how do you start talking with them about the photos, the first approach? I think you mentioned at the beginning that you usually work through an advocacy group. Is that correct? But do you ever just approach
Yes,
people on the street as well, or?
I don't. I only work through
Okay,
agencies, so I know that the people are vetted, that their stories are going to be, accurate and legitimate. They're not going to try to BS me and stuff, because they're known quantities to. This is through. Well, actually, I met him through David, but I met David through the Venice Community Housing, which is an organization that helps in Los Angeles with homeless issues and housing. I also and I worked with SPY, the Safe Place for Youth. I purposefully didn't want to work with minors because of the issue of informed consent, and not
right.
just for minors, but anybody I work with. I want to make sure that they're mentally able and physically able to give me an informed consent, so they really are collaborating with me on these.
Very cool. And now we're
So
back to
this is,
Chicago.
yeah, we're back exactly. So this is an important aspect of the overall story of homelessness in the U.S. And this woman lives with her partner under this is under the Kennedy Expressway, the busiest, most trafficked stretch of highway in the United States. Goes out from the city to O'Hare, and she is a full-time employed CNA, a certified nurse's assistant. She works in a nursing home, and CNAs around the country do so much of the hard work in hospitals, nursing homes, etc. That they go to people's houses and care for people who are disabled, and they're trained to do so. They typically make somewhere between $12 and $14 an hour. And in Chicago, you can't live on that. So she lives in a tent under the Kennedy Expressway and has a full-time job. She's part of the working poor who are homeless. There's another individual, this is also out in Venice, who worked his whole life, came from Mexico, lived in Los Angeles most of his adult life, and was a painter. And the fumes eventually caused disability. He couldn't be around. He couldn't be around them anymore. So he's been living in his truck for a number of years. He has 2 dogs that he cares for, and wonderful guy. And he paints all kinds. His truck. I have other shots that show the murals that he's painted on his truck, but they're amazing. And he talks about what it's like to live as a homeless person on the streets, about how the police will just impound your vehicle. And one time they impounded his vehicle, it had all of his medication in it. He lost all of his medication. He says sometimes the other homeless, the ones that do have drug habits, will come and start screaming or rob him, and he's afraid of that at night. But that's his life right now. So some of the homeless in Venice will form these encampments like Char or David, where they can protect each other, care for each other. When I was at Char's one time, she feeds other homeless people. If they have extra food, they all share it. It's a community. This woman I met also in Chicago through the Chicago Coalition. She's also a leader. She's been homeless for quite a while, but never, or not much on the street. She usually lives doubled up. And a lot of people, you don't see them, and they're invisible. Homeless people are invisible because they're in shelters, or they're living in SROs, single room occupancy hotels, or like Margaret, with family. You're doubled up. You don't have your own real address. And she's she's not young, but she cares for an adult son. And I've met her and I photographed her across the street from one of the community colleges in Chicago that has GED classes that are free. And she wanted to get her GED. She didn't need it for anything, but she wanted it for herself. Yeah,
Just a personal accomplishment.
just a personal accomplishment.
I love the complexity of the background in this image of Patricia.
I think of my grandmothers and their tchotchkes.
Uh-huh.
So Patricia is also a leader in the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, and she had a normal sort of working class life with her husband in a suburb of Chicago, and he died. And when he died, a year later, the sheriff showed up and said, "You're being evicted. You haven't been paying your mortgage." And she lost her house, and now she has her own apartment and all her stuff. This is a woman. She's an indigenous, a Native American, a Chippewa, and she's a fourth generation military personnel. Her great grandfather was in World War I. When he was serving in the army in World War I, he couldn't even vote because Native Americans didn't have the vote until something like 1923. But her grandfather, her uncle was in Vietnam, and she was in Iraq. She's a veteran. When she came back, she worked. She's a hospital, a nurse's aide, or what's her job? She's a a corpsman. She's a Navy corpsman, and works in hospitals and other healthcare situations. And she was sexually assaulted at a hospital in San Diego, a Navy hospital, and eventually left the military and has 3 kids that she raises. And I just love that this environment. John asked about the environment. Somebody who's a really terrific writer, Christoph Irmscher, wrote about this piece that this woman has come a long way, and the alley is a metaphor for that journey. And I used, obviously, this with the wide angle lens, as you can see on the panel on the right. It's a very wide angle lens, and I wanted to show that perspective, that vanishing point, but I wasn't thinking the metaphor till Christoph pointed it out to me, that
Right.
This is a metaphor for her journey.
Right, and her past is behind her.
Yeah. Her past is behind her. We have the shadow that's crumpled. It doesn't really, follow her shape perfectly, and with this little white form that she's almost looking at that conforms to her body. But she's looking at her story, at her history. And this was a decision I had to make. So sometimes there's more story that's important and has to be included, and sometimes there's less. We're looking at them on a screen, but they're meant to be seen as prints. And the Hasselblad allows me to blow them up to quite large size. For exhibition, they'll be 17 by 22 inches and 24 by 30 inches. And then the text becomes quite legible. This was another Army veteran. He was an Air Force veteran. After his service, he worked in Michigan and had a home construction business, which again, during one of the economic downturns, went out of business. His wife left him. He just had a really bad stroke of luck, series of events that broke him down, and he wound up, he migrated to Chicago, and he's living on the streets.
Yeah, another question we have is how are you putting the stories in the photo? That's from
Sure.
Marianne. So I guess she's asking about how the text is being inserted.
Great question. So I'm using Photoshop as a typographic tool. There are other softwares as well, and Photoshop used to be a really lousy type tool. It's become a whole lot better, but I had to really, really experiment and work with it to make it do what I wanted it to do, with line spacing and rotating and doing some of the things that you could do with Photoshop as a text tool. Again, it's not the easiest text tool, but at this point I'm pretty fluent in it. I have a very strong background. At RIT, I studied typography with sort of the guy who wrote the book on the history of typography and typeface. So I know how to do it from the hot metal days and printing presses. Now I can do a lot of the things that I could do with hot metal with the digital typography. And so I experiment a lot. I try a zillion different things for each image until it fits, until it's right. I use, I have to experiment quite a lot with the size and the fit and all of that stuff. when I find a place that works for the background, sometimes I can use it, like in this one, against the sky, against a wall, and I don't have to do anything. Some of them you might have noticed, like the one before it of Michael Coast, was I make a little text panel, and I as a background, and put the text on that so it's a little more legible. But if I don't have to do that, I don't. I only make the little color block, text block, if I need to. And I think we'll see another one coming up where I put the text on a block. Let's see. No, not that one. I was able to use the sky. What's fun about Photoshop as a type tool also is I can use the color picker and I can make the type any color I want. So against this blue sky, I used the sand, which was already part of the color scheme of the image. Randy is as an artist. He went to school of the Savannah College of Art and Design, and he's a very good artist. And he works in Venice on the boardwalk doing portraits and studies and things to make a living. But he's homeless. He's actually not homeless now. He's working full time. He came to the Chicago suburbs for a while and worked in Union City making murals and doing face painting on this Wild West town. And they did that to get out of LA for a while, but he's back in LA and he's working full time in food services. And Rex is another of my guides to the homeless community. He's also one of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless Leaders. And he and Tom take me around to meet people that they know, that they've vetted, that they know are going to give me a good story and be honest. And so he's gay, and he lived in the uptown tent city. He said he never had any issues with his sexual orientation at all. He became homeless when his mother died, and he was a primary care provider for his mother as she had a lingering death. And he's a good friend. So I enjoy spending time with him to this day. And he advises me when I talk about, okay, am I getting the demographics of homelessness right? What are some solutions? What do you think of tiny houses? And so he's a sounding board for me. This is another veteran. Again, veterans. There's a high percentage of veterans that are homeless, and the VA helps some, but not always. And many of the ones that I've worked with, individuals, the veterans, are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And this man was a Vietnam War veteran. He was grievously wounded by a mortar shell in Vietnam, and came back, and he's been in and out of hospitalization stuff. He just had a hard time reintegrating into civilian life, and he's been living in an SRO, so that's a single room occupancy. It's just a step up from living on the street. So you just get a room basically, but this apartment that he's got is brand new. He's got his own kitchenette and a bathroom, and he loves it. He's happy as can be. He's got an air conditioner. You can see he has a walker because of his leg getting, so badly, grievously wounded and damaged in the war. And he just loves this place. In his story, he talks about how happy he is. He's got air conditioning, clean bathroom. He's got, it's great. He's beautiful here, and it's really clean. There's no bed bugs. So we take for granted, a certain environment that we live in that not everyone has. And homeless people have to live in places where they're compromised, like bed bugs.
Jeff, we've got a question from Kevin. When you're composing the image, are you thinking about the text, or do you think about the text once you have the image shot?
I don't think about the text when I'm doing the image. I do the interviews first, so I have some sense of their lives, and then I want a background that seems to have some reflection of those experiences. And I made this portrait actually before I did the interview. And he talks about he drove semi trucks for his adult life, and then one day he said, what does he say? He gets back to the depot, and he says, "Tell my boss, kiss my ass, I quit." I put my kids through college. I was always gone through the week on the road. Now I'm doing me. So he had every right to do that. So he fixes bikes for other homeless people and for anyone who will pay him to fix bikes. And I did the portrait. I was introduced to him by David. I did the portrait against this fence. This is also Google in LA. And it created a huge problem for me in terms of where I could put the text. And I experimented around. This is when I began to realize that I had to use these blocks, these text blocks to put the text on.
Along the lines of the text, we've got a question from Jeff. It says Jeffrey's earlier work used handwritten text. At what point did he change to the typography we see here, and why so?
Well, again, I had studied it years ago, and I started making books. My thesis, my MFA thesis in graduate school, was a book of my writings as a poet and my photographs. And so I love books. I love print. I love typography, and I missed playing with it. So the handwriting was fine, and I loved it, and it was good, and people liked that it became a very personal way to do the stories. I began with my Vietnam series to experiment with typography in Photoshop and to use these color blocks, text panels. And so the photographs it was the photograph, they were pure, they were color, and then the text block was a separate, text panel was separate. And so I did that for that series. And then when I went back to Pigeon Hill, I started writing again because I missed that and I wanted to. With this project, this was what I wanted to do. I was tired of writing. My wrists are shot now. And so it's been really fun to bring back my love of typography. So here I'm using, so some of them are justified type. This one is centered. There's different ways to use type and to play with type that I'm getting so much pleasure out of. And he's that man was another individual. He's a young man who became homeless when his parents died. Actually, I'm sorry. He was from northern Indiana. His parents were abusive, and then he moved to live with his grandparents in Chicago before he and his brother. He could tell that his grandparents were tired of raising kids, and so as teenagers they left Chicago and came to LA. This is Vinny. He's from New York originally. He's an artist. He paints. As you can tell, he paints these really wild images on clothing, on canvas. People bring him canvases. He paints over them, and you can see there's a clown face. He's sort of obsessed with clowns. He said he was scared of them as a kid, and he thinks kids are still scared of them. And I photographed him on the beach by the boardwalk. I also put in one of these text panel type things, but I melted it, I screened it back so it's sort of melting into the sand. And he's got the dreadlocks. It's legal in California, so he smokes pot, And I think this is the last book from the series. Yeah, this is a wonderful young man who is transgendered. He grew up as a female and realized it just wasn't working for him. Had problems at home as a result, and came out. Lived on the streets for a while, and now he lives in a shelter for young people. I think he's 19 here. He's completing his college. He completed high school. He got very motivated. He found some mentors who helped him with school, made him love school and want to do well in it. He's in college now. He wants to make it as a musician, and he's gonna. This kid is awesome.
Very cool. We have another question. It's from Sandra, and she asks, how do you keep from getting emotionally and personally involved with your subjects to the point where you want to do more to help them? How do you separate the work you do from the need?
That's a really good question. It's a really hard one. I can't support everybody. I help people as I can. If they come to me for suggestions, I can connect them with some of these agencies that you've got on screen right now. There are so many wonderful not-for-profits out there in every city and small town well, I can't speak for every small town, in every city that are there to really help in a positive way with homelessness. And for example, the Lawndale Christian Center, my last 3 portraits were of individuals who are homeless, who were sort of impacted by the coronavirus. And so the Lawndale Christian Health Center is helping people who are homeless, who either have the virus or are being sheltered, kept away from shelters that have the pandemic spreading. So they're helping them, and so there's all these great organizations that I'll refer people to. Sometimes, I'll help people with a specific need if it seems like it's a really important and one-off kind of request. And for example, we helped somebody, Kathy Edelman and I helped somebody get a piano. She's a trained opera singer, was performing in Italy, and had a family at the age, started having kids at a fairly early age. And so she had to choose between her family and traveling as an opera singer, chose her family and lost her career. So she asked me, she did a GoFundMe, can you help me? I need to raise money so I can get my piano, which is in storage, retuned and hauled into my home so I can give piano lessons and get my career back on track. And so Kathy and I were 2 of the contributors, and we posted it on our Facebook pages to help her, achieve her goal. So, but how do I maintain some distance? My job is as a photographer to help them tell their story, and to do as good a portrait, to as strong a visual statement as I can do. And in an overall sense, the project needs to have a wholeness to it, integrity to it. They're not just random shots. They're telling not just any one image, but all together they work together to tell a story, whether it's about the Holocaust and surviving the Holocaust, to what war does to individuals, to growing up in a housing project, to living on the streets.
So Jeff, we've got a question from Andrew, and his question is, with such a long career and large body of work, how have you managed to stay inspired throughout the years?
I love photography. I love cameras, like my Hasselblad. I love printing. My early career was as a printer. As a police photographer, I was mostly in the darkroom printing mugshots and crime scenes. When I worked at the Eastman House, it was in the dark rooms for the most part, printing Lewis Hine and Alvin Langdon Coburn. I love photography. I love looking at photographs. I love the history of photography, and I love making pictures.
Well,
I've been doing it, as I said, it's a good way to end maybe, because I started exactly 50 years ago today, and I don't see myself letting up anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to complete our chat today. Jeff, I want to thank you so much for allowing us to help share some of your imagery. I hope that these links here are helpful to some people that might want to get involved. But Jeff, definitely thank you so much for your time and sharing your heart and your images with us. I want to thank John Scott as well and Roberts Camera for helping us to put this on. Again, the links on screen here are available to you that are watching the webinar if you want to get more involved. And we just, again, thank you for joining us today, and hope you have a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you from Hasselblad and John and Jeff, and we're sorry we couldn't get you on screen, but maybe we'll do it again sometime, Jeff.
Thanks again to both of you, and to Hasselblad and to Roberts, which is a place I frequented often when I was in Bloomington.
Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for joining us, and be sure to go to our website, hasselblad.com, and check out some of our other upcoming webinars. We've got some additional artist talk coming up, and we've got some other interesting webinars for you to stay engaged. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great afternoon.